Jason was the kind of man who turned heads when he walked into a room. Always dressed in crisp suits, his hair perfectly in place, his smile charming yet disarming, he had the aura of a man who had it all. At 35, Jason had worked his way up to become a well-respected corporate manager at a top firm in Chicago. His peers admired his leadership, his juniors looked up to him, and even strangers often assumed he must have a picture-perfect life. And to the outside world, he did. At home, Jason had a beautiful, loving wife, Emily, who was 7 months pregnant with their first child. Their love story seemed straight out of a fairy tale, college sweethearts who had survived distance, hardships, and life's many curveballs. Emily was the calming force in Jason's fast-paced life. With her gentle voice and kind eyes, she grounded him. Their home was filled with soft laughter, shared meals, and now, the excitement of a nursery being painted pale yellow. Baby books lined the shelves, and ultrasound photos adorned the fridge like little promises of joy to come. Emily spent her days planning for the baby, folding tiny clothes, and attending prenatal yoga classes while Jason worked long hours, often coming home just in time for dinner. But beneath the surface of their golden marriage, cracks had begun to form, cracks that Emily noticed but never mentioned out loud. Jason had mastered the art of pretense. To his colleagues, he was a devoted husband, always talking about Em and the baby on the way. But behind the scenes, Jason was starting to drift. The attention, the admiration, the chase, he missed it all. The weight of responsibility, of impending fatherhood, scared him in ways he didn't admit, not even to himself. And so, when temptation arrived in the form of a beautiful new intern at work, he didn't walk away. He flirted, first casually, then deliberately. But he was careful, at least he thought he was. Emily, perceptive and emotionally intelligent, saw the signs. The late-night calls, the sudden interest in new cologne, the increasing emotional distance. Still, she said nothing. No tears, no accusations, no confrontations. Just silence. The kind of silence that wraps around the air like a storm before the thunder. Jason mistook it for indifference. What he didn't realize was that her silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. A quiet strength brewing beneath her broken heart. And that silence? It would soon destroy everything he thought he had under control. Claire entered Jason's office on a Monday morning like a breeze that didn't belong in the building, confident, striking, and just enough rebelliousness in her attitude to make her stand out. She was 24, newly graduated, and excited about her internship. She had a spark in her eye that was hard to ignore, and Jason, always the composed professional, felt something stir in him the moment he shook her hand. Claire was bold, not afraid to challenge him in meetings or crack jokes that danced on the edge of inappropriate. She knew she was attractive and used it like a skill, flipping her hair, leaning in closer than necessary, flashing smiles that lingered just a second too long. At first, Jason resisted. He reminded himself of Emily, his beautiful, pregnant wife waiting for him at home. But the thrill was intoxicating. Claire was everything that Emily wasn't right now, wild, unpredictable, unattached, and completely disinterested in responsibility. Jason started inventing reasons to stay late. What began as genuine overtime soon became a mask for clandestine flirtation. He and Claire would laugh over takeout containers in his office, or she'd slide into the passenger seat of his car under the cover of darkness for drives that didn't lead anywhere but still felt like something. The relationship was electric, not physical at first, but filled with the kind of emotional infidelity that cuts just as deep. Texts turned from "don't forget the meeting tomorrow" to "I can't stop thinking about our conversation today." Lunch breaks were no longer just a break from work, they were escapes. They met at cafes on the far end of town, places where no one knew Jason, no one would recognize him as the man married to a woman carrying his child. Claire wasn't in love, she was playing a game. But Jason? He was losing control. He'd rush home to Emily with barely a kiss on the cheek, giving half-hearted smiles and empty reassurances. When she'd ask about his day, he'd mutter the usual, and retreat to the shower, scrubbing off any trace of perfume he thought might linger. But perfume has a way of clinging, not just to skin, but to memory. Emily noticed. She always did. At first, she dismissed it. Pregnancy made her sensitive to smells, to moods, to the way Jason looked through her instead of at her. But as days turned into weeks, the pieces started falling into place. Jason had started dressing better for work, choosing cologne she hadn't seen in months. His phone became his constant companion, guarded like a secret. He laughed less at home, spoke even less than that. Emily watched him become a stranger, her heart breaking not just for herself but for the life growing inside her. She never accused him, not once. Instead, she started paying attention to the gaps in his stories, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes, how he touched her with the guilt of a man betraying something sacred. Every time she felt the baby kick, it reminded her of the truth: she was becoming a mother, while Jason was running from becoming a man. Still, she said nothing. She folded tiny socks, read baby books alone, and stayed up nights pretending to sleep just to hear the door open after midnight. Claire's presence, though unknown to her in name, lingered in the air like a ghost between them. And Jason? He was too far gone to realize how deeply the cracks in their marriage were spreading. His affair wasn't just about Claire, it was about escape. What he didn't know was that while he was playing games with another woman, his wife was preparing to walk away from the board entirely. Emily had always trusted Jason, not just because he was her husband, but because trust was the foundation they had built their marriage on. But lately, that foundation felt like it was shifting under her feet, crumbling piece by piece in slow, agonizing silence. She didn't have undeniable proof, no lipstick on collars or anonymous phone calls, but she had intuition. A woman's instinct, sharpened even more by the life growing inside her. Jason was changing, and not in the way that could be explained by work stress or impending fatherhood. He was emotionally absent, physically distant. He smiled with his mouth but never with his eyes, and his touches had lost the warmth they once carried. Emily noticed, but she said nothing. Confrontation wasn't her style, not yet. Instead, she began collecting details like puzzle pieces, waiting for the picture to form. She quietly checked the trash bin for receipts, and more than once found ones that didn't make sense: a dinner for two at a restaurant she'd never been to, coffee orders in twos, ride-hailing logs from areas not near his office. She didn't snoop obsessively, just enough to build a quiet file in her mind that whispered, "You're not imagining this." She began glancing at his call logs when his phone was left unattended, noting numbers that appeared too frequently, text notifications that disappeared too quickly. She memorized the time he usually got home and began to notice a pattern in his delays, always around the same hours, always accompanied by vague excuses. Her heart wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, but her gut was screaming otherwise. Jason's moods also began to shift. He was irritable when she asked simple questions and defensive when she showed affection. When she shared excitement about the baby's kicks or new names she liked, he nodded politely but seemed miles away. The man who used to talk about their future with shining eyes now stared blankly at the TV, his phone always within reach. It was as if he was waiting for something, or someone. Emily started journaling her thoughts, partly as an emotional outlet and partly as a record. She didn't know what she'd do with it yet, but writing it down helped her remain grounded, especially on nights when her fears felt too heavy to carry alone. It was during one of her prenatal yoga classes that she decided to finally speak to someone. After the session, while sipping tea in the lounge, she pulled her best friend Sophie aside. Sophie had been Emily's closest confidant since college, a fiery, no-nonsense woman who always spoke the truth, no matter how uncomfortable. They sat on a bench under the warm afternoon sun, and for the first time, Emily let her guard down. Her voice trembled as she spoke, not with rage but with quiet heartbreak. She told Sophie about the late nights, the unfamiliar perfumes, the emotional void, and the subtle lies that cut deeper than any truth ever could. Sophie didn't interrupt. She just listened, holding Emily's hand and letting her speak. When Emily finished, Sophie didn't explode in anger or tell her to leave immediately. Instead, she asked, "What do you want to do?" It was a question that no one had asked Emily yet, not even herself. That moment became a turning point. Emily realized that she wasn't just protecting a baby anymore, she was protecting herself. Her maternal instincts weren't just about cribs and lullabies, they were about survival. She began thinking differently, more strategically. She paid attention to Jason's habits, watched his face more closely, and observed how he flinched when she spoke of the future. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was awareness. She wasn't waiting to explode. She was waiting to decide. And when she did, it wouldn't be loud or dramatic. It would be final. Because Emily understood something Jason hadn't yet learned: sometimes, the quietest storms leave the deepest destruction. Claire had learned early in life that power didn't always come from force, it came from suggestion, timing, and knowing when to lean in just enough to tip the balance. What started as playful banter between her and Jason soon turned into deliberate manipulation. She began to test boundaries in public settings, brushing her hand against his arm during meetings, laughing just a little too loudly at his jokes, and sitting closer than necessary during team lunches. Her eyes lingered a beat too long, and her compliments always danced on the edge of flirtation. Jason, intoxicated by the attention and the thrill of secrecy, began to respond more openly. He started letting his guard down around her, not just in private but in front of colleagues who whispered behind his back but never dared to confront him. Claire knew exactly what she was doing. She was turning the affair into something more than a secret, she was making it a game. And Jason, unaware of how deep he was sinking, thought he was the one in control. As Claire's influence grew, Jason's priorities shifted. The man who once marked every important date on the calendar now barely remembered the basics. He forgot Emily's prenatal checkups, missed a birthing class he had promised to attend, and on their wedding anniversary, he didn't even come home until after midnight. Emily had cooked his favorite meal, lit candles in the dining room, and dressed up despite her swollen feet and aching back. She sat there alone for hours, each tick of the clock slicing deeper than any argument could. When Jason finally stumbled in, he mumbled something about an emergency at work and disappeared into the shower. Emily didn't say a word. She just smiled gently, blew out the candles, and packed the untouched food into the fridge. Her silence was no longer filled with hope, it was the shell of a woman breaking slowly from the inside. Jason, meanwhile, felt increasingly invincible. Claire had made him feel desired, powerful, young. Her texts were now constant, filled with jokes, late-night selfies, and cryptic messages that kept him on edge. Emily's pregnancy, once a miracle in his eyes, now felt like an anchor pulling him into a life he wasn't sure he wanted. He began spending more nights at the office, claiming back-to-back meetings and client dinners. In truth, he was spending them in hotel bars with Claire, pretending for a few hours that he wasn't someone's husband, wasn't someone's future father. Claire dangled just enough emotional bait to keep him chasing, but always withheld enough to maintain control. She never said she loved him, and that only made him want her more. The moment everything changed came during the company's annual gala, a formal evening event held at a lavish hotel ballroom, where employees brought their spouses and celebrated achievements. Emily, excited to attend and show off her glowing bump, picked out a soft blue dress that hugged her curves and made her feel beautiful. But Jason, 2 days before the event, casually told her he wouldn't be able to take her because his boss needed him to attend a private dinner with stakeholders. Emily, disappointed but not surprised, simply nodded and said, "Of course. Work comes first." What Jason didn't know was that a colleague, unaware of the lie, posted a group photo from the event on social media. And there he was, in a tailored suit, standing far too close to Claire, his hand resting on her lower back as she laughed into his shoulder. When Emily saw the image later that night, she didn't cry. She just stared at it, her hand on her belly, and whispered to her unborn child, "You deserve better." And so do I. The image stayed burned in her mind, not because of the betrayal itself, but because of how openly he displayed it, no longer afraid, no longer pretending. That moment didn't just confirm her suspicions, it shattered whatever hope she had left. It happened on a quiet Tuesday morning, the kind Jason had always taken for granted. The sky was pale and cloudless as he pulled into the driveway after leaving early for an impromptu meeting that had been canceled last minute. He stepped inside the house expecting the faint smell of breakfast, the sound of Emily humming to herself, or maybe her soft footsteps padding down the hallway. But the silence that greeted him wasn't the peaceful kind. It was hollow, unsettling, and it crawled beneath his skin like something was terribly wrong. He walked through the house calling her name, casually at first, then more urgently. "Emily," he repeated, voice louder, tension creeping in. No answer. The kitchen was clean, the sink empty. The living room was untouched. Everything was exactly where it had always been, except Emily. He moved quickly to the bedroom. Her side of the closet had been cleared out. Her shoes, her favorite robe, the maternity pillow she always slept with, all gone. A tremor of confusion twisted into something darker. He rushed into the nursery. The crib was still there, the tiny onesies still folded, the soft blankets Emily had carefully chosen still draped over the rocking chair. She hadn't taken a thing from the baby's room. That realization sent a jolt through him. Why would she leave and not take anything for the baby? Panic set in. He ran back to the bedroom, opened drawers, threw open the bathroom cabinet. Her toiletries were gone. Her phone charger was missing. But her phone, it was off. Straight to voicemail. Jason tried again and again, each ring echoing into nothing. He called Sophie, his hands shaking. "Is Emily with you?" he asked, trying to sound composed but failing. Sophie's silence on the other end spoke volumes. "No," she finally replied. Why would she be? Her tone was flat, unreadable, and Jason could tell she knew more than she was letting on. He called Emily's parents next. They hadn't heard from her either, or so they claimed, but there was an edge to her mother's voice, something cold and restrained, as if she was holding back everything she wanted to say. He began calling everyone they knew, even distant friends. No one had seen her. No one had any idea where she had gone. She had disappeared without a trace. No note. No text. No goodbye. The silence was suffocating. Jason wandered the house like a ghost, replaying the last few weeks in his mind. And that's when the flashbacks began to surface, moments he had overlooked, small clues that he now realized were signs. Emily had been quieter lately, but not in the usual, soft-spoken way. Her silence had weight, intention. He remembered the way she had started writing more in her journal, always closing it when he entered the room. The way she had begun folding her clothes methodically, as if preparing for something. The night she'd asked if he wanted to feel the baby kick and he'd said he was too tired. She had looked at him for a long time then, eyes filled with something more than sadness. Maybe it was goodbye, and he hadn't even noticed. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, Emily had been laying the groundwork. She had started visiting a nearby library under the guise of reading baby books, but now Jason wondered if she had been researching shelters or safe places to go. She had gone to the bank a few times without telling him. He'd noticed the receipts but hadn't thought much of it. Her sudden interest in minimalism, in decluttering the house, had been her way of slowly removing her presence. And her calls with Sophie had become more frequent, longer, always taken in another room. Jason realized, with growing dread, that Emily hadn't just left him on a whim. She had planned it, quietly and carefully, preparing her exit in the shadows of his ignorance. And now she was gone. Truly gone. No trail, no hint, no closure. Jason sat on the edge of their bed, staring at the empty space where her belongings used to be. He reached for his phone again, tried calling her once more, even though he knew the result wouldn't change. Straight to voicemail. He leaned forward, pressing his hands to his face, the weight of his choices crashing down like a tidal wave. For the first time in years, he felt something he couldn't control, fear. Not the fear of losing a promotion or being caught in a lie, but the raw, gut-wrenching fear of knowing he had lost the one person who had truly loved him. And this time, he couldn't fix it with flowers or apologies. Emily was gone. And he had no idea if she was ever coming back. The days after Emily vanished blurred into a strange, painful haze for Jason. At first, he clung to denial. He told himself she'd just gone to clear her head, that she would call, that she would come back once she cooled off. But as each hour passed without a message, and each call went straight to voicemail, reality began to crush him with unbearable weight. He tried reaching Claire, hoping that the woman who had once thrilled him could offer some sort of comfort, or at least a distraction. But Claire didn't answer. Not his calls, not his texts, not even the messages he sent through social media. The woman who had once blown up his phone with winks and late-night selfies had vanished just as quickly as she had entered his life. At first, Jason thought she might be giving him space, but then he realized she had blocked him. No warning. No goodbye. Just silence. Claire had gotten what she wanted, the game, the thrill, and now that the consequences had surfaced, she wanted nothing to do with him. He had risked everything for her, and now she was gone, just like Emily. It didn't take long for the whispers at work to grow into full-blown rumors. Colleagues who once greeted him with respect now avoided eye contact. The receptionist stopped smiling. His boss, usually chatty, became clipped and formal. Jason overheard fragments of conversations in the break room, words like affair, wife, and disappeared spoken in hushed tones. He felt eyes on him everywhere, judging, accusing. One morning, he walked into a meeting and noticed how the room fell silent. No one said anything to his face, but the damage was done. His reputation, carefully built over years, was unraveling faster than he could control. He was no longer the admired corporate leader, he was the man whose pregnant wife had left him, and who had betrayed her with a woman barely out of college. His authority crumbled with every sidelong glance. At home, the silence was louder than anything he'd ever known. The baby toys in the nursery no longer symbolized joy, they haunted him. The tiny shoes on the shelf, the mobile hanging above the crib, the half-read parenting books on the side table, all felt like ghosts mocking him for what he had lost. The bed, once shared with love and laughter, now felt massive and cold. He found himself wandering the halls late at night, stopping outside the nursery door and just staring, hoping maybe he would wake up from this nightmare. But every morning confirmed that this was his reality. Emily was truly gone, and so was the life they had built together. The rooms felt smaller now, the air heavier, as though the house itself was punishing him for what he had done. The guilt was suffocating. Jason began drinking, not socially, not even to numb the pain, but to escape, even for a few hours. At first, it was just a glass of whiskey after work, but soon it turned into entire bottles drained in the dark. He cried when no one could see him, sobs shaking his body until he was too exhausted to move. He'd wake up on the couch, still in his work clothes, surrounded by empty glasses and a headache that felt like a punishment. He called Emily's number again and again, knowing it was futile, but desperate to hear her voice even in voicemail form. He even left messages, slurred and broken, begging her to talk to him, to give him one more chance. He knew he didn't deserve it, but he wanted it anyway. Emily's family had cut off all contact. Her parents, once warm and welcoming, had now become silent walls he couldn't break through. He sent emails, texts, even letters, none of them were answered. Sophie, who had once called him like a brother, now ignored his messages entirely. Jason realized he wasn't just being punished, he was being erased. He began arriving late to work, missing meetings, forgetting deadlines. Eventually, he sat at his desk one afternoon staring at his resignation letter draft, wondering what the point of it all was anymore. He didn't submit it, not yet. But the thought hung in the air like a rope he might one day grab. He had lost everything that mattered, and the only thing that remained was guilt, relentless, paralyzing, and completely deserved. Jason's world had shrunk into a space so dark and quiet that he could barely recognize himself anymore. Days blurred into nights as guilt and grief consumed him. But amid the chaos in his mind, one thought remained fixed: he had to find her. No matter how badly he had failed her, no matter what she thought of him, he couldn't let it end like this. Not with silence. Not with uncertainty. So, he did what he should have done weeks ago: he hired a private investigator. The man was experienced, discreet, and matter-of-fact, the kind of professional who dealt in facts, not emotions. Jason handed him everything he had: Emily's phone number, bank account statements, her daily routines, photos, details about her doctor appointments, and even Sophie's number, though he knew she'd never talk to him again. It felt strange, handing over pieces of Emily like evidence in a case, but this was the only hope he had left. The investigator moved quickly. Within a few days, he traced a small transaction Emily had made using her debit card in a town nearly 100 miles away. It was a grocery store purchase, nothing unusual, but it was something. From there, they followed a trail of small clues, more card activity, a library visit, and finally, what Jason had been both dreading and longing for, surveillance footage. The image was grainy but unmistakable. Emily, in a simple coat and scarf, walking through a bus station with a single suitcase in one hand and the other resting gently on her rounded belly. Her expression was calm, even peaceful. She didn't look scared. She didn't look angry. She looked free. Jason stared at the footage in silence, unable to tear his eyes away from her figure moving across the screen. He watched it over and over again until he memorized every step she took. She had made her choice, she had walked away on her own terms. Desperate to reach her, he turned to social media, posting a heartfelt message along with a photo of the two of them taken during happier times. In the caption, he wrote about how much he loved her, how sorry he was, how he would do anything to see her again. He didn't mention the affair, not directly, but he alluded to his mistakes, to the pain he had caused, to the child he hadn't yet met. He tagged her family, mutual friends, even Sophie, hoping someone would share it, respond, forward it to her. He printed missing person posters with the same image, the same words, and pinned them on bulletin boards across the city, even in the town where she'd last been seen. It was a public plea wrapped in shame and desperation. Comments flooded in, some sympathetic, others cruel. Strangers offering prayers, acquaintances leaving vague messages like, "You should have appreciated her when she was there." But Jason didn't care about the comments. He just wanted one thing, Emily's eyes to see those words, and maybe, just maybe, her heart to soften enough to reach back. What he didn't know was that Emily had already seen the post. She had been watching from a distance, quietly monitoring his every move online through a private account she never used under her real name. She read his words more than once, stared at the photo he chose, and even saw the thread of comments underneath. She didn't cry, but her fingers trembled slightly as she scrolled. Not out of sadness, but out of clarity. She wasn't hiding from him in fear. She was protecting herself and the little life inside her. She had made a decision not to disappear forever, but to take the time she needed, to rebuild, to become strong, to ensure her child entered a world without betrayal lurking at every corner. She had no intention of replying yet. Not while the wounds were still fresh. But she was alive, safe, and watching. Jason had found evidence of her existence, but not a way back to her heart. That road, if it even still existed, would take more than posters and apologies. It would take transformation. And he hadn't reached that point, not yet. Emily's new life began quietly, without fanfare or drama. She arrived in the small, quiet town nestled between wooded hills and sleepy roads with nothing but a suitcase, a heart full of pain, and the hope that she could start over. Her Aunt Margaret welcomed her without questions, just open arms, a warm bed, and the kind of gentle understanding that came from having known sorrow herself. The house was older, but comforting, a place that smelled like baked bread and old books, with creaky floorboards and wind chimes on the porch. It was exactly what Emily needed, stillness, space, and someone who didn't push for answers she wasn't ready to give. She spent her first few days resting, adjusting to the quiet, and letting her mind breathe for the first time in months. The chaos she had left behind, the lies, the late nights, the broken promises, felt like a bad dream she had finally woken up from. But Emily wasn't the kind of woman to sit in sorrow for long. Even though her heart still ached and her body carried the weight of betrayal alongside the weight of new life, she began taking small steps toward rebuilding herself. She applied for a part-time job at the local bookstore, a cozy little place that needed help organizing inventory and running the register. The owner, a kind woman named Janet, hired her almost immediately. It wasn't glamorous work, but Emily found peace in the simplicity, stacking books, labeling shelves, and talking to customers about stories that had nothing to do with her own. She began to walk to work every morning, slowly, one hand on her growing belly, breathing in the crisp air like it was healing her from the inside out. The town didn't know her story, and she liked it that way. Here, she wasn't the wife who left, she was just Emily, a soon-to-be mother trying to find her way. Her aunt, seeing how deeply she had been hurt, gently suggested she join a women's support group at the community center, a safe space for women who had experienced emotional betrayal and trauma. Emily hesitated at first, unsure if she was ready to speak her truth aloud, but after attending one session, she knew she had found something valuable. The room was filled with strong, kind women who shared their stories without judgment. Some had been through divorces, others through years of infidelity and silence. Listening to them helped Emily feel less alone. When she finally shared her story, her voice shook, but no one interrupted. No one dismissed her pain or told her to move on. They simply listened, and in that listening, she began to heal. Each week, she grew a little stronger. She started journaling again, not just about her pain, but about her hopes, her dreams, and the life she wanted for her child. She read parenting books in the evenings and slowly began to buy baby supplies, a soft blanket here, a tiny onesie there. She was building something again, this time with care, with intention, and with a strength she hadn't known she possessed. The nursery her aunt helped her set up was small but filled with love, decorated in soft yellows and greens. Every item had a purpose. Every corner was a symbol of her survival. One evening, as the sun dipped low and cast a warm glow through the bedroom window, Emily sat in the rocking chair, her hands resting on her belly. The baby kicked gently, and she smiled, tears welling in her eyes, not from sadness, but from something deeper, hope. She leaned down and whispered, her voice soft and full of promise. "You're not coming into a broken world," she said. "You're coming into a life built on strength, on truth. We may have started in pain, but we're not staying there. You and me, we're going to be okay." And in that moment, surrounded by peace and possibility, Emily finally felt something she hadn't in a long time. Free. Months had passed since Emily disappeared from Jason's life, and the days had carved deep lines of regret and loneliness into his face. He had spent countless nights staring at the empty nursery, the silence louder than any words he could speak. Then, one afternoon, as he sifted through the mail that felt heavier than usual, he found an envelope with his name written in Emily's familiar handwriting. His hands trembled as he tore it open, heart pounding in a mixture of hope and fear. The letter was calm and measured, unlike anything he expected. Emily didn't ask for explanations or offer excuses. Instead, she wrote about the pain she had endured, the strength she had found, and the life she was building for their child. At the end, she agreed to meet him at a small cafe on the edge of town, not to rekindle what was lost, but to give them both a chance at closure. The morning of the meeting, Jason's nerves were a whirlwind. He replayed their last moments together in his mind, agonizing over the mistakes he had made and wondering if Emily would even want to see him. When he arrived at the cafe, he spotted her immediately. Emily was seated by the window, the sunlight catching the glow of her skin and the softness of her hair. She looked different, not just physically but in the way she carried herself. There was a quiet strength in her posture, a peace in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. Jason's breath caught in his throat as he approached, every step weighted with the years of pain between them. She greeted him with a nod, no warmth, no coldness, just a steady calm. Once seated, Jason's defenses crumbled. Words poured out of him like a flood, apologies, confessions, pleas for forgiveness. He spoke of the nights he regretted, the lies he told, the moments he failed to be the husband she deserved. Tears welled up in his eyes as he admitted how empty his life had become without her. He begged for a chance to make things right, to be the man she once believed in. But Emily listened quietly, her expression unreadable. When he finished, the room felt heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady but filled with meaning. "Jason," she said softly, "you lost more than a wife." The weight of those words settled over him like a stone. She wasn't just talking about her departure or the affair. She was speaking of trust, love, respect, all the things he had shattered. Emily's gaze met his one last time before she stood, gathering her coat with deliberate calm. She didn't look back as she walked away from the table, from him, from their shared past. Jason sat there, stunned and hollow, realizing that this meeting was not a new beginning but an ending, a final chapter closed with grace and courage that he could only admire from afar. The cafe buzzed around him, but he was trapped in that moment of loss, the sound of the door closing behind her echoing like a farewell he wished he could undo. In the silence that followed, Jason understood something vital. Forgiveness might be possible someday, but rebuilding what was broken required more than words. It required change, and the willingness to accept the consequences of the past. Emily had moved on, stronger and more certain than he ever could be, and all he had left was the memory of a love lost to mistakes he couldn't take back. The story of Emily and Jason is a powerful reminder that silence doesn't always mean weakness. Sometimes, it is the quiet strength before a storm, the courage to walk away when words fail, and the beginning of a new kind of freedom. Emily's silence was not the sound of surrender, but the steady heartbeat of resilience, a shield protecting herself and the life she carried within. In her quiet departure, she reclaimed her power and set a course toward healing and hope, showing us all that sometimes the most profound battles are fought without a single spoken word. Silence can be a statement of strength, a refusal to be broken by betrayal, and an assertion that self-worth can never be compromised. As the voiceover carries this message, the screen fades into a montage of Emily cradling her newborn baby, the soft light highlighting the joy and peace radiating from her face. The baby's tiny fingers curl gently around her own, a symbol of new beginnings and the unbreakable bond between mother and child. Emily smiles, not with the forced happiness of someone pretending to be okay, but with the genuine glow of a woman who has found her path through the darkness. Her eyes reflect a future filled with promise, where love is no longer tainted by lies but blossoming with truth and hope. This tender scene invites us to consider how healing is possible even after deep wounds and that life, in all its complexity, can be beautiful again. Cut to Jason, sitting alone in the dim light of the empty nursery they once shared. The crib stands quietly in the corner, untouched, a stark reminder of what has been lost. His face is etched with regret, a man haunted not only by his mistakes but by the emptiness that follows when trust is broken. He reaches out, brushing his hand lightly over the crib's rail, but there is no comfort to be found there anymore. The silence in the room is heavy, filled with echoes of promises unkept and love betrayed. Jason's solitude is a cautionary symbol. What happens when we take for granted those who love us most and fail to recognize that silence may not be absence, but a cry for respect and truth? His story reminds us that it's never too late to change, but some losses are irreversible. This tale invites viewers to reflect deeply on their own relationships. It calls on us all to value the people we love, to listen beyond the words, and to recognize that silence can be a powerful message. We should never mistake quiet for weakness or indifference. Instead, we must be attentive, compassionate, and proactive, reaching out when we see distance growing, asking the difficult questions, and choosing honesty over convenience. The story of Emily and Jason shows that ignoring the signs or betraying trust doesn't just hurt one person, it fractures the very foundation of a shared life. It is a lesson in empathy, respect, and the consequences of choices made in moments of weakness. The final message is clear: cherish your loved ones every day. Appreciate the small acts of love, the silent sacrifices, and the unspoken bonds that hold relationships together. Understand that sometimes, when someone chooses silence, they are not giving up, they are gathering strength to protect themselves and those they hold dear. And if we learn to hear those silences with open hearts, we may prevent heartbreak before it happens. Life is fragile, love is precious, and trust is the thread that weaves it all together. This story is a call to action, a reminder to nurture those connections and never take for granted the people who choose to stay, even when silence surrounds them. Because in the end, silence is not the end, it can be the start of something stronger, braver, and more true.